Tonight, London calling. President Biden's UK trip to shore up support for Ukraine, even as the president walks back a push for Ukraine to NATO.
I don't think there is unanimity in NATO about whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO family now.
Plus, they're back. Lawmakers return to a jam-packed congressional agenda. And the Bible Project, the mission to bring the word to millions.
You understand the Bible as a story, and you see how that story leads to Jesus.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Russia's invasion of Ukraine set to dominate a high-stakes NATO summit. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Setting out a vision for the future of Ukraine. That's the main goal this week for members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. President Biden made his way to Lithuania today for the NATO summit, making a pit stop to meet with UK leaders along the way. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has our top story. Caitlin, what are we expecting out of this NATO summit?
Jenna, we know several countries will announce new aid packages for Ukraine during the summit, but we also expect some debate over NATO membership. President Biden is pushing hard for the military alliance to invite Sweden immediately, but the allies are divided over admitting Ukraine.
I don't think there is unanimity in NATO about whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO family now, at this moment, in the middle of a war.
A major concern about admitting Ukraine in wartime is that it would draw NATO into direct conflict with Russia and possibly start a global war. Article 5 of the NATO treaty enshrines a collective defense.
If they were hypothetically to get NATO membership now, well, then NATO's at war with Russia.
On Capitol Hill, bipartisan agreement.
We cannot admit Ukraine into NATO immediately.
The focus right now should be helping Ukraine win this war.
Meanwhile, Turkey and Hungary have acted as roadblocks to Sweden becoming part of the alliance. But as of today, Turkey's President Erdogan has agreed to send Sweden's accession protocol to Parliament as soon as possible. Before traveling to Lithuania, where those conversations are sure to continue, President Biden stopped in the UK. First, meeting with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
We head from here to NATO in Vilnius, where we stand as two of the firmest allies in that alliance.
The president also sat down with King Charles for the first time since the monarch was crowned in May, their conversation centering around climate change. In Lithuania, ahead of the NATO summit, Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg said the members may disagree on some topics, but they're united on supporting Ukraine.
The most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign and independent nation in Europe, because unless Ukraine prevails, then there is no membership issue to be discussed at all.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been invited to attend this week's summit and is expected to have a sideline meeting with President Biden. He's voiced a desire for assurances to be made that his country will be admitted to NATO after the war, saying it would be a clear message the alliance is not afraid of Russia. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you. Michael O'Hanlon is a senior fellow and the director of research in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution, and he joins us now. Michael, welcome. So, of course, a lot of dynamics at play here. What are you watching for in this NATO summit?
Well, I certainly think the question of how we talk about Ukrainian membership in NATO someday is probably the most controversial and in some ways the most interesting. The more immediate question really is, what do we do to help Ukraine if this current offensive doesn't really pan out as well as we're hoping? And we have to decide, are we going to double down and give them another, collectively with Europe, another couple $100 billion in aid for another year to see if they can do better in 2024? And that's not really a debate for this week, but it's on everyone's mind, in the back of their mind. And we'll learn and see how the offensive goes and be able to react to that. But right now, this question, do we say to Ukraine, after this war, you'll be in NATO? Or after this war, we'll give you some other kind of security guarantees that are more meaningful than just paper guarantees like the ones we provided in '94 that didn't really amount to much. And also, by the way, if you start saying Ukraine can be in NATO after the war, does that give Vladimir Putin an incentive to keep fighting and make the war last longer? Because he is so adamantly opposed to Ukraine being in NATO. Is there a different mechanism by which we could help ensure Ukraine's long-term security, but not wave the NATO red flag at the Russian bull. So these are the kind of questions that are on my mind, and they seem to be on the minds of leaders in Vilnius as well.
What would you like to see done with Ukraine?
I don't think NATO is the right vehicle myself. I think that there are different ways to create security organizations. And as long as we have American trainers and personnel on the ground in Ukraine once an armistice or a peace deal is reached, that plus the promise that the United States would come back up and protect its own trainers and its own people, that is the core element that we need. So I've done some writing with a colleague, Lise Howard, and we've proposed a different kind of security community that we call the Atlantic Asian Security Community that would, again, put a training mission on the ground, essentially as a tripwire, but avoid having this all be about NATO, knowing that that just guarantees Russian opposition. So that's the kind of construct that I think we ought to be exploring.
Michael, how do you think Russia sees all of this NATO meeting? And in light of the Wagner Group uprising, is Russia less of a threat now?
No, I think Russia is not less of a threat due to Wagner. Russia is somewhat less of a threat to NATO territory than we feared they would be a year and a half ago when this war began, because, of course, they petered out inside of Ukraine, and they're holding 17% of Ukraine, but they're not making net headway. So in that sense, militarily, they can't easily keep on marching into Poland or Latvia or Estonia. But they could make nuclear threats again. They could blow up world energy markets or grain markets again. They could start trying to assassinate President Zelensky again. Maybe they still are and just aren't succeeding. There are things Russia can still do that I will never view it as somehow defeated or on its heels. I'm always worried about what Putin's next step may be. And for that reason, I do want to help Ukraine beef up its defenses, but I also want to think creatively. We may have to contemplate some kind of a situation where Ukraine doesn't get all of its territory back in the near term on the battlefield, but may have to wait over a longer period of time to regain it diplomatically and otherwise. That may have to be a conversation we have later this year.
All right, Michael Hanlon with the Brookings Institution. It's always good to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you kindly.
And here in Washington, lawmakers are returning from recess, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is ready to get to work. In a letter to colleagues, Schumer laid out the Senate agenda for the next few weeks, writing Senate Democrats will continue working with Republican colleagues to advance legislation in a range of policy areas, including lowering the cost of insulin and other prescription drugs, addressing rail safety, holding bank executives accountable, and competition with China. Tomorrow, all senators will also attend a classified briefing on artificial intelligence and how it's being used to protect national security. And for more on this, let's bring in CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, great to have you with us in person this evening.
Good to be here, Jenna.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has been very critical of the Senate and its lack of legislation passed. There, of course, is a lot on Chuck Schumer's plate. Yeah. Do you think he can get any of this passed?
I think he's going to be able to get a few things. When I say passed, let's be clear, out of the Senate. That doesn't mean it'll necessarily get passed by the House, which, of course, is led by Republicans. And I think that's really the key here. Will Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, take any of this up if it does get passed? So, I mean, I think in the Senate, rail safety is something that has been bipartisan. I think that'll get passed through the Senate. I think the Farm Bill, I think there's an FAA authorization bill, to strengthen the FAA to a degree when it comes to safety and other mechanisms. So I think there are a few things the Senate will actually get passed because you've got Rubio and Romney and even some other not Republican in name only senators, as many conservatives would call them, on board with some of this legislation. So I think you'll see some movement in the Senate. I just think it gets bottlenecked in the House Republican House. That's what it is.
As it so does.
What is it?
In Washington, I know. One thing Schumer is noting is the importance of Democrats confirming federal judges. To date, President Biden has seen 136 judicial confirmations. That surprised me. He's outpacing Trump, Obama, and George W. Bush. Is this something Republicans are worried about, David?
I think they're worried about it to an extent, but let's remember that record that you're talking about is true, but it's at the district level. It's not at the circuit level. So, you've got the district, circuit, and then Supreme Court. So the Biden administration doing very well at that district court level. That's where the trials are typically held. The circuit level, Donald Trump and others have done better than the Biden administration. So when it comes to Republicans, I think what they're saying is, okay, you filled a lot of the district court judges, but that's been in Democrat-controlled states. states. What about Republican-controlled states? And the problem there is that any Republican senator, it's called the blue slip rule, any Republican senator can say no to a judge to even be considered. And I think when you have vacancies in the Republican-controlled states, we will see if the Republican senators step up and use that blue slip authority that they have.
Yeah. You know, House lawmakers, they're coming back tomorrow. There's been some drama within the GOP. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene reportedly voted out of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. David, your thoughts on that? I know you've interviewed her several times.
Several times. It's a head scratcher, and I got to be careful. I don't have that many follicles, so I don't want to scratch too much. But look, I think this is an interesting one. I think here's the bottom line problem. She's associated with Kevin McCarthy, and the House Freedom Caucus does not like that. She has taken McCarthy's side when he was up for Speaker, and she kept voting with him ad nauseum all the time. And then, of course, on the debt ceiling agreement as well. And there are other things as well. She has been stapled to the hip of Kevin McCarthy, and that is the antithesis of what the Freedom Caucus is all about. They're not big fans of Kevin McCarthy, as we know, and as we've reported here on Faith Nation. And so I think that's the big play. I also think, look, I think it's political. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has bigger aspirations. She wants to be seen as more call it mainstream to a degree, not this radical fringe character. And, you know, whether that means a potential Trump VP pick, I can't see that at all. But, you know, in her mind, she might be thinking that. So I think she wants to get a little bit more mainstream and build that portfolio.
Yeah, just a few seconds left, David, but recent article from The Hill, this is the headline. McCarthy's latest challenge, prevent shutdown while avoiding GOP revolt. He's got until September. What do you think?
Yeah, he'll get it done. But I think more importantly, I think Democrats will also get it done because, remember, Democrats do control the Senate, and that's where the kind of the push and pull is going to be. So McCarthy, I think, will take care of his end of it. I think Schumer will take care of his end of it because ultimately no one wants to see a government shutdown, especially in 2023 in September, which, let me think, about 4 months before the Iowa caucuses. And, of course, Biden is up in a primary as well. So I don't think it's in no one's best interest to have the government shut down, political or otherwise.
Yeah. All right, David, good to see you.
You bet. Great to see you, Jen.
Thank you. And coming up, how advances in AI are bringing hope to some suffering from spinal cord injuries. Extreme weather is plaguing parts of the country. Nearly 50 million people are forecasted to face triple-digit temperatures this week, with heat advisories blanketing much of the South. In California's Death Valley, temperatures are expected to reach 125 degrees later this week. Meanwhile, in the Northeast, flash floods are overwhelming various states. In New York, rising waters from nearly 8 inches of rain washed out roads. One woman was killed trying to evacuate. And for people in Vermont, they could see the state's worst flooding since Tropical Storm Irene back in 2011. In health news tonight, artificial intelligence promises to change the world, including the possibility of medical breakthroughs. Scientists in Switzerland recently showed AI's potential for treating spinal cord injuries by using it to help a paralyzed man walk again. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us the story.
40-year-old Gert Jan Oskam lost the use of his legs more than a decade ago in a motorcycle accident. Thanks to technology linking his brain signals to his legs, he can now stand, walk, and even climb stairs.
Within 5 to 10 minutes, I could control my hips, like they were like the brain implant picked up what I was doing with my hips. So that was like the best outcome, I think, for everyone.
In order to walk, our brain sends commands down the spinal cord to a specific area responsible for controlling movement. Injuries to the spinal cord can interrupt that communication, causing paralysis. The Swiss doctors and scientists, however, developed a way to restore that communication through a different pathway.
This project shows something completely new that is not anymore science fiction, but we can give back hope to the people with a spinal cord injury, and they will be able to walk again thanks to this digital bridge.
It involves 2 surgeries, one at the brain where doctors implant 2 electrodes to record its signals. Then electrodes are placed on the spinal cord area responsible for leg movement. The brain sends signals to a laptop computer equipped with artificial intelligence that decodes the thoughts of the patient, then encodes the desired movement to stimulate the legs.
So of course, the patient is not walking normally as us, able-bodied person, but we have some kind of a cyborg in a way that have artificial intelligence extracting information and enabling to restore digital communication.
Oscom received his implants in 2017. He says although it's taken hard work to learn how to use the system, it's worth just being able to do normal things again.
Just an example, I'm training 10 years to stand up with a friend having a beer. And that's something I think people don't realize.
The system is still being tested. 4 other people are set to try it with the hope that it can eventually become available to many more with spinal cord injuries. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
An experiment between a few friends becomes a global mission to teach people how to read and understand the Word of God. Details on the Bible Project next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. The Bible is the best-selling book of all time, but reading and understanding it isn't always easy. That's why 10 years ago, 2 friends created a couple of videos to help encourage their friends to read Scripture. As Dale Hurd reports, a decade later, the Bible Project is motivating millions of people around the world to pick up the Word of God.
Tucked away in a quiet Portland neighborhood is an animation studio that is opening the Bible to millions in a new and fresh way. Some amazing things are happening behind that door. An idea of some college buddies has become one of the most successful ways to help people understand the Bible. During their college days, longtime friends Tim Mackey and John Collins would kick around ideas on how to get more people reading the Bible and understanding it better. The result was an animation experiment called Bible Project that at first only included 2 videos posted online for their friends. Less than 10 years later, Bible Project has more than 140 employees, creating more than 180 videos and 350 podcast episodes over the internet. With over 620 million views in over 200 countries and over 5 million subscribers worldwide. Michael McDonald is the Chief Global Focus and Strategic Relationships Officer.
None of us were smart enough to think about, would we create this big nonprofit out of this? This really was a passion project of 2 friends going, I think this would be helpful to not only just us, but some of our friends. And the crowd just caught up so fast in not only watching them, but wanting more of them. And they started helping fund them just with, $5 here, $10 there, until we had enough funds to make another video, and away we went.
After college, John served as a pastor before beginning a career making explainer videos for large companies. After Tim got his PhD in Hebrew Bible and Jewish studies, he became a pastor and seminary professor. Then they decided to join forces, combining Tim's Bible knowledge and John's creative abilities. And Bible Project was born.
This is just basically our workflow for one of our fully animated videos. So some projects are an illustration, some are an animation, some are writing, some are storyboarding.
Then I meet with the artist, and then we go through all this in detail, and then the artist goes and draws the beautiful version. So by the time I sit down to record, I've got this in my head. The first dispute, that's hard to say quickly.
That is hard.
The first dispute starts when God says that he still loves his covenant people, Israel, despite their failures.
Bible Project is trying to help those who only see the Bible as a collection of inspirational quotes. It takes on those difficult passages in the Bible that many Christians tend to avoid because they seem to be confusing or disturbing.
It's pretty neat to see kids from the age of 10 who are even, writing in saying just how engaged they are in the scriptures. And then we've got 85-year-old folks that are writing in going, I thought this was for my grandkids, and I never thought I would go back and read the Bible with new eyes.
With videos now in 56 languages, Bible Project is also reaching the Muslim world.
You find people in, Tunisia watching the Arabic videos and sending in comments of, I'm a Muslim who, has been interested in the Bible, and I didn't know how to, engage it or read it. And I found your videos on YouTube because they're free. And now they're opening up the scriptures in a unique way and understanding, you know, what it's saying about Jesus.
So an experiment once meant to only help a few friends is today helping millions around the world to know and understand the Bible better.
One thing we think God is doing is that he's helping people see the Bible as a really important part of their life. And our contribution to that is helping people see the Bible through this paradigm of biblical theology, where you appreciate the Bible in its literary design, and you understand the Bible as a story, and you see how that story leads to Jesus, and then it just makes things, it's falling apart. It makes things more meaningful.
Dale Hurd, CBN News in Portland, Oregon.
Still ahead, a historic event marking a major sign of revival. Next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a baptism of biblical proportions. Thousands lined up at California's Pirates Cove over the weekend to take part in the Jesus Revolution baptism. It's the same place they filmed the baptism scenes in the movie, but Pastor Greg Laurie says they never had an event quite like this and explained to the crowd what baptism really means.
We have around 4,000 people signed up to be baptized today. They're saying goodbye to the old you, buried with Christ in baptism, so you might walk in newness of life. That's what the Bible says.
And one woman came all the way from Arizona to be baptized for the first time. And by the end of the day, get this, more than 4,500 people were baptized. That is just amazing. And if you haven't seen the movie Jesus Revolution, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. That's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.